In 2013, the History Channel aired a miniseries called The Bible, executive produced by Roma Downey and Mark Burnett, in the weeks leading up to that year's Easter. My mom made the whole family come downstairs and watch it every night it was on. I have a vague memory of that time. I'm pretty sure I started off reluctant and not wanting to watch it. But then, I remember really getting into it. I remember it being this amazing, beautiful, perfect, cinematic thing that made me embrace religion more at the time. Now, in 2020, I decided to rewatch it before Easter for the first time since then. Partly for nostalgia's sake, partly to review it on here, which I will not be doing with religious bias, by the way, and partly to see if it lived up to memory. Unfortunately, most things just don't. The Bible starts off pretty awful. There's this narration telling us about the Bible and its impact on the world, with intermittent cuts of historical figures like Martin Luther King Jr. and John F. Kennedy referencing the Bible. Then, for reasons I cannot understand, they show a condensed version of the entire miniseries, playing clips from every episode while the narrator goes on about the Bible and the clips we're seeing. It was like a recap of a show for a show you haven't even seen yet. And then they start from the beginning again with Adam and Eve, and I thought it was redoing the recap thing for some reason. We see Noah's Ark on stormy waters, a clip we just saw, and then the narration suddenly stops and you jarringly realize the show has actually started. But even when the show started, they cut from the Noah's Ark story almost as soon as you realize the show started, and cut years ahead to the story of Abraham, which I guess is when the show actually, really starts. The overbearing, annoying narration, the constant cutting 10 years later nonsense, the poorly aged effects, the props such as swords and armor that look like they were bought at a Halloween store, and just the visual style of the show, the way it looks and the way it's shot, makes the Bible feel like one of those cheap History Channel documentaries you'd watch in school. Which I guess is fitting considering this did air on the History Channel, but it's still disappointing, especially for me who remembered it as looking beautifully cinematic for some reason. It even has those really bad edits throughout the series that those History Channel docs have, like the classic zoom into the eye with the whoosh sound effect. And while I'm aware that the Bible is a pretty lengthy book, it doesn't change the fact that a lot of this 10-episode adaptation feels rushed. They rush from story to story, and then each of those stories are rushed on their own, hence the aforementioned cutting and narration. While I generally do not like the narration here, it is extremely necessary at times. The Bible often feels more like a telling of an outline of stories rather than a telling of actual stories. It feels like this is for people already very well familiar with the source material, which is to say the Bible is for avid Christians what superhero movies are for comic book fans. There are even moments when a character will come on screen, say their name, which will then be met with rising music and a cutaway to a black screen, the way Batman or Captain America would be introduced into a movie. This only really worked 2 times for very well-known religious figures. To be fair though, it stands to reason people watching the Bible would most likely be Christian and familiar with the book and all of its stories, rather than those who aren't. So I can't fault it for its pro-Christian slant or perspective too much, and it's also not as steep a slant as something like God's Not Dead. While on the topic though, I have to mention how weird it was to see killing and war and wrong things glorified because it was followers of God doing it. And when the shoe was on the other foot, it was portrayed as bad as it really was. I guess it's been a long time since I've read the Bible, but it is way more messed up than I remember, and so much of that is just okayed and written off. In this miniseries, there was also a lot of excitable overacting that resulted in exaggerated, cartoonish performances and portrayals. This made the good actors in the show really stand out. My favorite episode of the Bible is episode 4, which focuses on David of David and Goliath fame. The actor who plays the older version of David is one of the best in this series. He isn't overacting, and he plays the character well and interestingly. The better half of this episode is also shot really well, comparatively anyways. It actually looks kind of cinematic. And the story here is intriguing and entertaining, and one I don't think is very well known, except for the Goliath part. I do not understand what is with the inconsistent quality of this show. A handful of these episodes feel completely different from each other. Sometimes it'll be great in quality, awful, or average. Even halfway through the show, I noticed the props got better. It's not a problem when the inconsistency is caused by something like episode 4, but when the quality randomly goes down from there rather than improving or staying the same, it is. It's a shame because beyond these flaws, and when other flaws like narration and cutting aren't prevalent, you have an at least interesting show with a good story at times I found myself enjoying. After all, these stories are famous for a reason. And while they're absolutely crazy in so many ways, that kind of stuff can tend to make a good story. I really like the actor who played Jesus. He did a good job at portraying this mysterious, strange, benevolent Messiah character. Though there were times where the actor's accent cracked through his performance, mostly only happening when Jesus would talk to crowds. And there were also times where his performance felt held back, like they didn't want to show Jesus under any other light but benevolent. But overall, I like the portrayal of his character in the show. Honestly, he's kinda dope. He's like this revolutionary hippie spreading love and good shit, as well as this new age religion that goes against the establishment. That conflict between Jesus' ideas and the ideas of Judaism is super interesting to watch play out. And it was also nice to see violence addressed negatively when Jesus came into the show, whereas, like I said, it had been so glorified before. When Jesus came into the show, the episodes stayed consistent in quality, which I appreciate. It wasn't the highest quality of the show, but it was better than the worst, still with its flaws though. That being said, this New Testament section of the show, which focuses on Jesus, works on a lot of levels. The effects are done better, the story is thoroughly good and interesting, the pacing is solid, the score becomes noticeable here as a really good, strong piece of music. Also, Mary Magdalene is played by Madani from The Punisher, which I had to point out. She gives a good performance along with the rest of Jesus' disciples and most other actors in this latter part of the show. Also in the latter part of the Bible, I found it to be undeniably moving at times, whether it be from brutal imagery or a simply emotional human scene. And I say this strictly from a storytelling perspective. I think no matter your beliefs, there are moments in this show that can affect you on some level and be appreciated. When we got to the point where the Bible shifted its focus solely on Jesus and his story, I found it fascinating to have seen how we got there. Most people know some of the stories in the Bible, but I feel like me, few knew how they were connected and how one event led to another. As condensed as the Bible may be, I thought it was still cool to get a basic picture of all the stories and how they interacted with each other. It was also fascinating to revisit the whole Jesus story for the first time in years, more mature, and finally understand things like where the conflict between Judaism and Christianity originated. There are plenty of aspects that I found very fascinating, and that I think others could too, religious or not. Going in with an open mind, you get an interesting perspective on Jesus' impact, and you can understand this joy or light and the religion surrounding him brings to people. It is feel-good, religious or not, and I stand by that. Though, honestly, there may be some nostalgia bias here. And while I'm going on about the good aspects, mainly in the part of the show that features Jesus, I find it unlikely that anyone who is not already Christian gets past the bad in this show to get to that good, which also has its flaws. I can even see some religious people not bothering to finish this. Maybe that's why they showed the whole show at the beginning, so that you know they're good episodes, you just have to trudge through a few. I mean, yeah, the Jesus part is definitely the best part of this show, and the people who made it know it. Just look at the DVD cover. And if that doesn't convince you, the fact that they released a movie called Son of God that literally just comprises of all the Jesus episodes of the Bible, like some best of YouTube compilation back in 2014, a year after the miniseries, well, that should convince you. I have to give it to the show. It's ambitious as hell, and conceptually, I love the idea, but it just didn't completely pan out. I did expect to hate on it more than I did, though. It may not be as amazing as I remembered, but it's a pretty good miniseries, just with a fair share of pretty in-your-face flaws. I give it 2 stars out of 5. If you're looking for something else Christian or religion related to watch, I strongly recommend Silence, which was directed by Martin Scorsese and was hugely overlooked. And if you're looking for something lighter, turn to The Prince of Egypt, which tells one of the best Bible stories in my opinion and is beautifully animated by DreamWorks. Okay, I'm not reviewing a show for a while after this.